Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Guarm in the Trial of Valor on Mythic.
So this encounter, as you may have guessed, is pretty much about your damage. This boss has a very large health pool, and you have only 4 minutes to kill him before he enrages and just one-shots your entire raid. If the majority of your raid team does have the 35th trait in their artifact weapon, you'll find that the enrage timer isn't that much of an issue, but it's still pretty tight. Do keep in mind though that the boss was recently nerfed, which reduced his health by 5%. So if you were struggling before this point, you might have an easier time now. Now before we go into any details, if you've seen any kill videos of this boss where guilds have been one-tanking it, you can no longer do this. The multi-headed ability now has a 30-yard range instead of 8, so don't even bother trying to one-tank it. As for the rest of your comp, 4 healers is a really good standard. The encounter doesn't necessarily have high healing requirements, but you need to have at least 3 dispels, and having the 4th makes everything much easier. And for your DPS, just bring a balanced DPS composition. Range heavy comps don't really help with the lick debuffs that much, because you just have far less room to spread. Now before we go into the mythic stuff, let's get some basics out the way just to get you all in the mood.
Now the breath on Mythic works the exact same. You want to split your raids into 3 groups and assign each group of players a single breath type. You must stick to this breath for the rest of the encounter just like you did on Heroic, otherwise you'll get one shot. Now you want your range DPS to be spread out at least 5 yards at all times. We set up a line within each breath group and assign people to stand within a certain position within that line. Once they move into the correct breath line, they remain still in that location until the new breath comes in. That way you'll only need to move when a breath starts and you won't have to move back after the breath finishes. This helps you just increase the amount of DPS you're doing to the boss because you're not running around the entire time. Now flashing Fangs also works the same, however instead of having the boss constantly face towards the raid, you now have some pretty good timers, so make use of them. You want to tank him side on, and whenever the breath is about to come in, you then face the boss towards the range camp. After the breath has gone off, you want to face him back towards the wall so that the range group is not going to be hit by any incoming Fangs. This gives them far more room to be spread out in, and being spread out really helps with the Roaring Leap, as it will always then go on melee, which is far better for damage than range players being hit and the boss having to run all over the place. Having this extra room also allows you to deal with the lick debuffs in a much more relaxed way, as they'll only ever hit one target. Now the Frost Lick should be dispelled by a single healer, and it should be that healer's job throughout the entire fight. The Shadow Lick just needs to be topped up by all of your healers, however the Fire Lick needs to be spot healed fast. The initial damage of this ability can be close to dealing 75 to 85% of someone's health. You just need to react to them fast and just top them up nice and quickly. And apart from those, you'll have the Headlong Charge, which remains the same, and you'll see 3 of them in total. You just want to stack in the middle of the room, assign healing cooldowns for each one just so you're not going to die.
So with all that out of the way, let's cover the mythic mechanic in play. So the gap in between each of the Headlong Charges, the boss will place 3 new debuffs on random non-tank players on a semi-frequent basis. There is a Flame Foam, a Frost one, and a Shadow one. Which one of these debuffs he actually decides to apply is completely random, so sometimes you'll get one of each, sometimes you might get 1 fire and 2 shadow, you might get 2 frost and 1 fire, or you can even, in quite rare circumstances, actually get 3 of the same type. These debuffs do a small amount of ticking damage for 10 seconds, and then once they expire, they instantly kill you, unless you match the debuff with the exact same breath type. So as an example, if you've been standing in the fire breath for the entire fight, and you so happen to get the shadow foam or the frost foam, when it expires, you will die. However, if you had the fire foam, it will simply just disappear. To solve this issue, these debuffs can actually be dispelled. Each time you dispel one of them, they'll actually jump to the nearest player with the exact same duration left when the debuff was actually dispelled, providing it was under 4 seconds. Whenever a debuff is actually dispelled under 4 seconds left on its duration, it'll actually just go back up to 4 seconds as soon as it jumps to a new target. Not actually that necessary for the strategies we're going to tell you, but it's some interesting trivia for you anyway. Maybe it'll help you. So what is the strategy? Well, the moment the debuff is applied to you, you need to identify immediately whether or not it is your breath type. If it is the same as your breath type, well great, it's absolutely fine, you can just stand there and let it expire. However, if it's not the same breath type, which most of the time it won't be, you must run to a player that does match that particular type, call for a dispel on your voice comms, and then run back to your breath line. This is why we stand in formation after every single breath and place world markers on that location to represent that group. That way people know exactly where each debuff can be dropped. And the way that we assign our dispels is pretty simple. Once all the debuffs is out, which takes actually like a second or 2 because they are actually applied in a staggered fashion, we then have set healers to dispel set debuffs. Healer 1 will always dispel the first person within the raid frames. Once the debuff player is called out for a dispel on voice comms, he'll dispel him. Healer 2 will always dispel the second person within raid frames, again, once that person is actually called for the dispel, and Healer 3 will dispel the third person within raid frames. And then Healer 4, we have permanently dispelling the Frostlick stun debuff, and that one, of course, is completely separate to the foam ones.
So just to quickly cover a very basic version of the strat, if you get a debuff on you and it matches your breath type, just chill out, you're absolutely fine. However, if it doesn't, you run to a player that it does match, call out for a dispel, and then run back to your line and you'll be absolutely fine.
Now there are two things that you need to keep in mind also when dealing with these debuffs. If you get multiple debuffs of the same type come out, you should avoid dropping them on the same player. As an example, if two players have the fire debuff and they both need to go drop it on the fire group because they have a different breath type, they can't run to the same player to be dispelled. They can, but it's very, very messy because the chances are is that both players are going to be dispelled at the same time, and instead of the debuff going on the fire player, it's just going to go on each other, and instead you solve nothing apart from put your healer's dispel on cooldown, which basically you're fucked. There's no return from this point. So if there are multiple people that are running to say a fire group, a shadow group, or a frost group, run to different players. It's not something that you can really call out on the fly. You just need to observe who has the debuff and which direction they're running towards. And the last thing that you need to know about this debuff is the breath crossovers. So 3 times in the encounter you'll get debuffs at the exact same time that a breath comes in. And really you can deal with this situation in 2 different ways. The first way of doing it is to completely ignore the debuffs, move into your position for the breath, and then you need to have like a perfectly placed master spell come in just before the debuffs expire. The debuffs will then just jump to 3 new targets and they'll have a 4-second duration, and they have 4 seconds to react and then move into the correct place to be dispelled. But we personally recommend the second option. We actually changed this sort of halfway through our progression on the boss. We decided to go this route instead, which is to simply have everyone stood still, deal with the debuffs as fast as you possibly can, and then move into the correct breath. So essentially you're getting rid of the debuffs before the breath rather than after the breath. Doing it this way gives you roughly 5 or 6 seconds rather than the 4, but it also means that you don't have to rely on a master spell, and people are relatively spread. Getting a master spell to hit every single target that has a debuff isn't ideal. And the reason why we have players stood still while the breath is being cast, regardless if they have the debuffs or not, or regardless if they're even in the correct breath, is because if you have players running around all over the place and you're trying to dispel at the same time, the dispels aren't going to go on to the right players. So we have people stood still while the breath cast is going on, we deal with the debuffs, and then the last second or so of the cast of the breath, you then move into the right cone. Apart from that, the only real important tips we can really give you with this fight is how to deal with the fire lick. The licks in this encounter are actually random. He'll pick 1 out of the 3 of them on set timers, and the fire lick really is the most deadly, especially when it's like after a breath or just before a breath. The best way to deal with this situation is to have your damage reduction cooldown ready to be pressed almost instantly, or a health pot almost instantly, and just assign healing cooldowns for certain breaths. It's not perfect because of course you're using healing cooldowns for the charges, but if you have like Vs available, or even like damage reduction cooldowns, maybe you could save like barrier or spirit link or something like that, there's not actually too much you can really do. You just need to be spot on with your healing after the breaths. You need to top people as soon as you can, but if you can make use of those cooldowns, then you should use them on breaths.
Yeah, and generally speaking, as a player who, like, maybe you don't really have a damage reduction on yourself, say you're a DPS, maybe you only have like 1 health pot throughout the fight, try and restrain from using it during the Headlong Charge. Your healers should be able to cover you. If you die during Headlong Charge, that's normally your healer's fault, so unless they call for you to use the healing pot as part of like maybe a cooldown rotation, try and save it for when you do get that flame lick on you, otherwise it's very likely that you might die.
And that's all it is to this encounter. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide helped you out at all, then please do drop us down a like. You'll help us out as well. And a huge shout out to all of our supporters over on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support. We appreciate it very, very much. And we shall see you all in the next one.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.